Hi, thank you for tuning in to the Emerging Themes video series. I'm Emma Nugent, Information Sharing Project Officer at the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet. For me, it's the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples watching today. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The Emerging Themes video series seeks to deliver complex information topics related to MARAM and the information sharing schemes through interesting and easily digestible videos. Today we're hearing from Dee Honeychurch, Family Violence Lived Experience Consultant and Regional Engagement Coordinator for the Strengthening Hospital Responses to Family Violence at Ballarat Health Services. Dee will be speaking about how information sharing would have made a difference in her life as a victim survivor. Thank you, Dee.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Okay, so I'm going to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I want to take a moment to appreciate the long history of this country, and let's all take a moment to honour the fact that Aboriginal people cared for and protected this land we now call home since the Dreaming. Their connections to the earth, animals, seas and waterways is part of their being. To all elders, past, present and emerging, thank you for having me here today on Wadawurrung land. I also extend my respects to all elders across all Aboriginal nations and language groups. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also acknowledge the strength and resilience of adults, children and young people who have experienced family violence and recognise that it is essential that responses to family violence are informed by their experiences and advocacy. I pay my respects to those who did not survive and acknowledge friends and family who have lost loved ones. I would also like to acknowledge those watching this session today with a lived experience of family and domestic violence. Today I'll be discussing real incidents of family and domestic violence, which may be confronting for the audience. If at any time you feel unsafe, please call 000 for immediate assistance. If this content is triggering, you can call 1-800-RESPECT or Safe Steps crisis line, which are both 24-hour national support lines for people experiencing family violence. While anyone can be a victim of family violence, data shows that it's predominantly perpetrated by men against women within intimate partner relationships. Today in my presentation, I'll be using gendered language, focusing on women and children as victims of family and domestic violence. So there's a picture of me at 5 years old. I've changed a bit since then, but I'm Dee and I'm a child survivor of family violence. Today, I'm going to talk about my story and the impact of recognising children as survivors in their own right and practice. I'll also talk about the benefits of using the adult and child information sharing schemes to keep children experiencing family violence safe. I want to acknowledge that every child's story of abuse and survival is unique. I can only speak on behalf of my story. It's not a reflection of every child survivor. However, through my career in the family violence sector and working with families impacted by violence, the systemic issues I faced as a child largely remain the same. I would love to thank my mum and my sister for allowing me to include their story as part of mine. We have an unbreakable bond, and I am forever grateful to the roles they played in trying to protect me. My father, who is the perpetrator of the abuse we experienced, will be referred to as Bill throughout my presentation today. When looking at what being a father means, Bill failed miserably. So I have not called him Dad since I was 8 years old. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can continue my talk. My story of experiencing family violence began when my mum was pregnant with me. Bill had a significant dependency on alcohol, which was a trigger for his violence. And my mum's experience of family violence began after my older sister was born. He presented well when sober, charming, kind, even funny at times, but him being sober was rare. And I remember as a child thinking if he just gave up the alcohol, we'd be a happy family because there'd be no violence. I would describe growing up with family violence as like living in an action thriller movie, always trying to escape the evil villain who set out to hurt or kill you. That person for me was Bill. My first memory of witnessing violence was when I was 5 years old. Bill had a gun and threatened to commit suicide. He lined my mum, my sister and myself out outside the garage, and he fired gunshots. We stood there in shock and disbelief, but we also felt somewhat relieved. Threats of suicide and active suicide attempts were common for Bill. He eventually emerged from the shed irate with my mum for not stopping him, and he assaulted her quite badly. The violence was regular, and it escalated the more times my mum attempted to leave. My mum always had a safety plan in place for us kids. She always took steps to be protective, even though she was under extreme duress. We had an outside toilet at the time, and so when my sister and I would hear the violence in bed, and one of us would get up and ask mum to take us to the toilet, the other would follow. As we moved outside, we would have to run really, really fast to the car because he would chase us. We always made it out. We lived 30 minutes outside of Ballarat in a small town, so the drive would feel long, with one of us always checking behind to make sure we weren't being followed. Thankfully, my mum would organise somewhere for us to stay, a friend's house or a cheap motel, but like any woman funding her own safety from violence, the money soon ran out. My mum worked hard, but she also had full financial responsibility of the house, bills and care for us kids because Bill refused to work. The more my mum tried to separate from Bill, the more frequent and severe the violence became. I recall the last time I witnessed the physical abuse of my mum so vividly, and this incident would go on to appear in my night terrors into my early 20s. One day when my sister and I arrived home from school, Bill was sitting at the kitchen table with an abundance of gifts for us. My mum came home from work in preparation for a weekend away we had planned with family friends. Bill stated that if I stayed with him, I could have the gifts, but if I didn't, I wouldn't get anything from him. I stood there as a 7-year-old girl, completely confused. I knew even then he had never paid for anything for us, so this act confused me. Is this how a parent shows love? Through gifts? I thought. At this point in time, I was consciously terrified of him. He often manipulated and controlled me. Gaslighting was his favourite tool. I thought about what would happen if I did accept the gifts, or if I didn't. I knew this was a lose-lose situation. Even at such a young age, I felt like my safety planning was failing. Before I could make up my mind, Bill launched at my mum and strangled her. He punched her several times in the head. My sister and I ran as fast as we could to the police station, which was just a few doors up from our house. It felt like the longest run of our lives. We knew if we didn't make it quickly to get mum help, she'd be dead. The police officer was new in town, which was a relief because the previous officer was never much help. He immediately attended the scene and saved our mum's life. It was then that the service system became involved in our lives. The police officer referred us to a women's and children's refuge. I remember the first time we showed up at refuge. It was an interesting place. My first impression were that the kids and adults swore a lot. My mum always wanted us to use our manners and speak nicely, regardless of our circumstance, so swearing was really foreign to me. We got assigned our room and a social worker, and she went through a talk with me about keeping our location a secret. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone my full name, where I live. We were basically de-identified. My sister and I were temporarily placed in a new school. I hated that school, and I still cringe driving past it. I remember feeling completely distressed watching my mum leave. For children who experience family violence, this is common. because whenever mum leaves, we never ever know if we're going to see her again. Eventually, we were moved to a safe house, but we all slept in the lounge because we felt too frightened to sleep in our bedrooms. While we were in refuge, Bill initiated family court proceedings. Because he was unemployed, he got legal aid. However, my mum worked and had to pay the full fees. Bill lied to the court about everything. He accused my mum of parental alienation, even though she was just trying to ensure our safety. Well, the court granted Bill interim access because, you know, every parent has a right to see their children. And to this day, I'm absolutely mind blown by this right. Access visits were scary. The whole time, Bill would talk about killing my mum and her new partner. He gave us alcohol. At the time, we were 8 and 11 years old. He would check my body for bruises every time he saw us. He would also become violent with other female family members who were supervising weekend visits to ensure our safety. I will never forgive the family court system for allowing access to occur. It has left me with lifelong trauma that would never leave me. I will also never forgive the family court for allowing the system abuse of my mum, for allowing Bill to control her through a court system that's meant to protect us, and for allowing him to abuse his children in the process. Mum had been back and forth to the family court several times, fighting for our safety. One day, a new justice appeared on the bench, Justice Byrne. This man saved our lives. He immediately stopped access visits, appointed an independent children's lawyer, and ordered Bill to complete drug and alcohol treatment and a parenting program. This was uncommon at the time, and his lawyer threatened to appeal, which was unsuccessful. I believe there are many lawyers who represent perpetrators of violence who are complicit in the system abuse of women and children. Childhood trauma seems meaningless to them as long as they're getting paid, and in my view, there needs to be more accountability in this space. When I met the children's lawyer, I really felt like for the first time in all of the years we endured abuse, that I was seen as a survivor of family violence in my own right. Apart from my mum seeking our views and advocating tirelessly on our behalf, we had someone with influence in the court to speak to us, seek our views, and advocate for us. Finally, my mum was awarded full custody and we were free, or so we thought. You see, you're never really free from violence. Either the trauma impacts you across the lifespan in different ways, and/or the perpetrator just doesn't give up on trying to destroy your peace. I was getting ready for school one morning when 2 people in suits holding folders knocked at the front door. It was child protection. Bill had made a complaint that I was being sexually abused by my now stepdad, who I have to say is the most amazing man. They asked me lots of questions about sex, about being touched inappropriately. I was 8 years old. I hadn't even heard of most of the things they were telling me. I knew Bill had lied once again in an attempt to have me removed from my mum, and thank goodness the child protection practitioners believed me. Bill continued to harass and stalk us for quite some time. I contacted the child protection worker because she gave me her card, and she said to call me anytime I needed to chat. I was so desperate for someone with authority to hear me that I called her to tell her Bill was terrorising us. She referred us to Victoria Police, who managed to get him to stop. But she also wrote me this letter and sent it to me direct in the mail. Dear Dione, thank you for your phone call. It was lovely to speak to you, and you're right. Your dad's behaviour is frightening. In future, if your dad is harassing you, you need to call the police on 000 so you can get a quick response. You are safe with your mum. She is a wonderful mum who is very good at keeping you safe. Your dad's behaviour is not okay. It is never okay to use violence. I wish you all the best for your future. And I'm not going to name the practitioner because she actually still works as a practitioner, and I want to protect her privacy. I felt so relieved. I felt seen and heard. No, I wasn't offered any ongoing counselling, but to be asked about my views and reassured about my safety, for them to validate that Bill's behaviour was dangerous directly to me, was such a weight lifted off my 8-year-old shoulders. Bill eventually ceased his harassment after I wrote him a letter to tell him I never wanted to see him again. I was 9 years old, and it felt so good to assert my boundaries at such a young age. But I shouldn't have had to write that letter. I should have had the support of the service system to write that letter on my behalf, or at least take away the emotional labour from my mum, who was constantly fighting for us. As soon as my child protection case was closed, I felt like my support was gone too. I felt like it was okay to be seen and heard when there were allegations of child sex abuse, but no support to deal with the trauma I had experienced previous, or even the trauma of what was discussed in that interview. When I left school, I knew I wanted to work in the family violence sector. I didn't know in what capacity. However, I ended up becoming a family violence court registrar, and then went on to work in prisons with perpetrators. And now I'm responsible for the implementation of the multi-agency risk assessment and management framework in healthcare, or MARAM, as most people know it. I absolutely love the work that I do, but I'm still seeing children's voices silenced or their views not considered. I recall attending the comprehensive MARAM training and the facilitator introducing the framework as having its fundamental purpose being that children who experience family violence are recognised as survivors in their own right. I could have shouted from the rooftops. Finally, the government understands that our family violence experience is individual and it belongs to us. The information sharing schemes allow the service system to work collaboratively to manage risk and reduce harm to adults and children experiencing family violence. These schemes would have been life-changing for our family in terms of removing the bulk of emotional labour from my mum, who had to use everything within her mentally and financially to advocate for our safety. But as a child, instead of being shut out of interview rooms where my mum was given the opportunity to tell her story, I would have been given a chance to tell mine. Bill would have been held accountable for his sadistic and disgusting behaviour. I know the service system has evolved since I experienced family violence, but I can assure you there has been significant impact on my life from being left out of the conversation when I was a child. I think at times, and especially with my professional experience in the sector, we leave children out of far too many conversations about them, where decisions are being made about their lives, and it honestly takes away any skerrick of power and control we have left when that happens. I feel like my strength was underestimated on so many occasions, and that actually leaving me in a room to do craft with a social worker was well intended, but I really just felt like going outside and screaming at the top of my lungs, "Someone please ask me what I want. Ask me how I feel. Ask me my version of the violence that I have experienced." We have had 8 children murdered in the last 5 weeks in the context of family violence. We must ensure that we make the service system access easier for children. Our mums should not have to fear child removal because of family violence perpetrated by men. They should not be left poor and most often homeless because they are being dragged through a family court process that continues for years and years and years. So I'm urging all organisations prescribed under MARAM and in the information sharing schemes to engage children in conversation about family violence. Work together collaboratively to manage risk. Involve the voices of lived experience in the professional development of your staff. I would like to thank the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare for all of the work you are doing in this space and for your advocacy. And thank you for platforming the voices of children and allowing for me to share this story with you today. Thank you.